Hey, remember I said I was going to be working on this thing using just what I had lying around my place if I could, see how far I could get? Well, this was day one. I've just been rummaging around outside in my steel rack. Well, it's not my steel rack. It's actually the pile of metal I've got leaning against my old pine tree in the corner. And I've pulled out some bits of metal that, although they're a bit scabby and they're not really suitable for making anything decent out of, they are good enough for me to make what we used to call a jack pole when I worked in the circus. Yeah, years ago I worked for Weber Brothers Circus. And when you work in the circus, you're not employed for just one thing. You're expected to muck in and do whatever needs to be done. Well, every time we hit a new town with the circus, one of the first things we had to do was put up the big top. The big top tent is held up by 4 huge king poles. And to get these 30-foot king poles up into a vertical position, we'd use a 4-wheel drive and a jack pole. A jack pole is a levering pole that digs into the ground and pivots and allows a cable that's been attached to the winch on a 4-wheel drive, or even just to the tow point on a 4-wheel drive, and the vehicle can be driven away. It allows you to pull up something very heavy from the ground and get it up into a vertical position. So I'm making a jack pole to lift the motors up and get them out of the back of the Landrover. Okay, well that looks like it'll work. Now it just needs some eyes on it so that I can attach the ropes and straps to it. So an easy way of doing that is a bit of a reinforcing bar bent into a hoop on either end. Here's a handy little trick. Cut your reinforcing rod to length, and then instead of bashing it and crashing with the hammer, just get a piece of water pipe and bend it into shape with that. And then you can just finish it with a rubber mallet. 2 of those, 1 for each end. Right, weld those in place. And we'll be ready to see if this thing works. Right, do you see what I mean? It's just a pivot point. The pull on the vehicle is a lift on the motor. Ta-da! And it's up. Yep, it's all clear. We'll just shove the bugger out of the way. Like most Land Rovers, it's got binding brakes. So the big heave-ho. Some pieces of wood. I'm not sure if this trolley's going to take its weight. I'm a little bit dubious about this Chinese shit. But I'll lower it down gently. Look at that. Oh. Of course, after that first practice run, I was getting really good at dropping it. Oh, I found 2 mirrors. They're awful. I won't be using those. Nice. Mats. Gaskets. Badges. Workshop manuals. And oh, another motor. Fancy that. Mind you, I'm getting really good at dropping these by now. Haven't broken anything yet. Bloody things have got a sump shaped like a rugby ball. They won't stand up by themselves. Nice to get all that weight out. As I said, I'm getting really good at dropping them. And picking them up. My God, they're heavy. And messy. Right, well it's day 2 of lockdown. I've paired all my socks. I've read most of Tolstoy's War and Peace. Learned a couple of new languages and emptied out the Landrover. I put the Landrover into a spot where I'm happy with it sitting for the next month while I pull it apart, and I've assembled a few things that I'm going to need to work on it. Come and have a look. So after doing a 4-week restoration on my other Landrover, I learnt what it was that I was going to be needing. The first thing is a decent sturdy bench right next to where you're going to be working to put stuff. The second thing that you're going to need is a spray bottle full of diesel. Don't waste your time with CRC or WD-40 because this stuff is way cheaper and you're going to be using a lot of it. Plus, it really stays in place and works for days. But the first thing I found, and the most important tool that most of you may not have, is a really good impact wrench. This one's battery powered and it's handled everything that I've ever asked it to do. I use it quite a lot on boat trailers when I'm disassembling ones to do rust repairs on them. The other thing you're going to need is a good butty socket set. This socket set I've had since I was a teenager. Bits of it have been lost, bits of it have been broken. I've added to it by putting in some tube sockets. I've got some impact sockets. Those are the black ones that don't smash when you use them on the impact wrench. They're in another container that I haven't brought out from the garage yet. Everything on a Landrover is imperial, so don't expect your metric sockets to fit perfectly. You're going to have to learn which metric socket corresponds to which of the imperial measurements. And lastly, a good selection of containers. I use several different containers for putting all the parts into. That way, when I'm putting it back together, I can just grab the selection of nuts, bolts and fittings that go with each part. For example, you might have one for under the bonnet, knowing that all the bolts come from under the bonnet. Then you could have another one for dashboard. Everything to do with the dashboard or bolting down the seats goes into that container. Okay, so no more waffle. Let's get some tools and get into this. I'll whip the spare wheel off first. And then the bonnet on these things isn't even bolted on. It just fits into two hooks. So the bonnet can be lifted off. And then I'm going to start removing the radiator support panel and the front guards. Then should be completely bare and ready for me to start work on. Firstly, I'm going to be removing the radiator, which is just bolts along the top and down the sides. And then the radiator support panel. That is secured by bolts inside the wheel arch here. Undo those on either side, and that leaves me able to take the guards off. The guards are secured with bolts up inside here. 4 bolts down there. Then I can take the guards off, and that will then leave the front of the vehicle completely accessible for me to get in and start work on. Next, I'll be taking the doors off and removing the roof. After the roof and top sides have been taken off, the tub, the bottom sides, can be easily removed by 2 people. Then I'll have just the firewall, which I'm going to leave on the chassis unless I absolutely have to remove it, because the positioning of the firewall is very, very important for the hanging of the doors and the fit of the front guards. I don't want to disturb it unless I have to. So the sun's going down behind the hills and I've got little piles of Landrover all over my yard. There's a pile here, there's another small pile here, and I've got a big pile just here. I would have got the seat box out if it wasn't for some stubborn little nuts and bolts down in the corner, which I'll have another go at tomorrow. But my tummy's rumbling and I'm going to go inside shortly and make myself some tea. But I'm very pleased with the condition that everything's in. The old owner of this beastie gave it a bit of a ladies' makeover. It's not a real recondition, it's just like makeup. You wash the bits that show and slap some paint on them. and that's what he's done here. You can see that the outside of the chassis rail has been painted. The chassis from the front bumper up into the radiator supports has been painted, but the rest of it is its glorious old self, which is great. I'd prefer it like that. At least I know nothing's been hidden. I'm really pleased with the general condition that it's in. One good sandblast and a prime, and this thing will look great. One of the weak points on a Landrover is the firewall, and I'm also very pleased with the firewall. It's looking very genuine and original with no rust. So we'll strip all this paraphernalia off. I'll get the pedals out tomorrow, and then I'll see if I can use my shopping trip, which we're allowed during lockdown once a week, to go to the hardware store and buy some sandblasting sand. If that's possible. I don't know the rules just yet. Anyway, that's the end of video 2 of the Landrover 109 lockdown restoration. Thank you for hanging out with me, and we'll see you in video 3 coming up possibly even tomorrow afternoon.